Hello, I'm Jennifer Collins, and I decided to do my research project on the author Nathaniel Hawthorn. I'll just give you a little background on Nathaniel himself. Pictured here is a picture of him. Nathaniel Hawthorn, he was born in 1804 and he died in 1864. He was born in Salem, Massachusetts during the days of the Puritans. At a young age, Hawthorne had a leg injury which required him to be immobile for some time. And during this time, he became interested in literature and in writing. At some point early on in his life, his father developed yellow fever at sea and eventually died from the disease. Hawthorne then began working by weighing and gauging salt and coal to help his mother make ends meet for the family. And when his father died, they moved in with his wealthy uncles. Later in life, he married Sophia Peabody, who was a transcendentalist. While Hawthorne did not necessarily classify himself as a transcendentalist, he lived in commune for a while to save money for he and Sophia's wedding. And he was particularly famous for writing the well-known story, The Scarlet Letter. I will be analyzing or interpreting one of his short stories entitled Rappaccini's Daughter. I actually read the story a few years back with my associate's degree in a previous English class, and I don't know, it just caught my attention. So here we go. Here are just a few pictures pertaining to the story. Here to the left is just a cover of probably many versions of this story, of this short story that was published. The middle picture shows Beatrice and Giovanni together in the garden, and this picture really puts emphasis on the purple flower. And this will all make sense in just a second after I summarize the story on the next slide. So here's the summary. It starts off with the character Giovanni, who goes to Padua. It's a place in northern Italy, and he went there to receive his higher education. Giovanni gets a room in a mansion that he lives in that happens to overlook a beautiful garden below. Giovanni has a professor by the name of Baglioni that tells him about the garden. He goes to tell him that the garden is owned by Rappaccini. Rappaccini is a famous doctor or scientist, and Giovanni learns that Dr. Rappaccini takes his flowers and turns them into medicines. Dr. Rappaccini takes great pride in doing this. Baglioni also goes on to tell Giovanni that Dr. Rappaccini cares more about science than mankind and will basically do anything for scientific gain, including sacrificing humans. During Giovanni's time staying in this room, he sees Dr. Rappaccini tending to his garden. He sees Rappaccini tending to his garden, and One day he notices that when Rappaccini gets near the purple flower, which is very prominent in the garden, as in the pictures I showed before, he notices that when Rappaccini gets close to the purple flower, he wears gloves and also a mask and just doesn't get too close in general. One day, he notices that Rappaccini calls for his daughter, whose name is Beatrice, to tend to this particular flower. Mind you, Giovanni describes her as not wearing gloves or mask or anything while handling this flower, and she's not harmed, although Rappaccini seems afraid to touch the flower. Giovanni starts to gain a liking for Beatrice, who he describes as beautiful, and he makes his way down into the garden. They meet and talk, and he eventually realizes that she is poisonous, and now so is he. Baglioni gives Giovanni an antidote to give to Beatrice to drink to reverse the poisonous curse that her father has put upon her. Beatrice drinks the antidote and she dies. It doesn't heal her from the poisonous curse or whatever. So that's pretty much a background of the story. Okay, so one of the major themes in this story is basically good versus evil. Giovanni goes to say that she's beautiful and good and innocent in her intentions, but the poisonous side created by her father leaves her to appear evil as well. So it's kind of like a battle throughout the whole story. And one of the quotes that I got from the story that is said by Giovanni, he says, "What is this being? Beautiful shall I call her, or inexpressibly terrible?" He goes to wonder if Beatrice should be considered innocent or bad, since it's not by choice that she is poisonous. What sort of person is Beatrice Rappaccini? Human or non-human? Good or evil? Innocent or corrupt? Tender-hearted or poisonous? And that's kind of like the ongoing theme with the story. It's like back and forth. Good versus evil. Like, Giovanni wants her to be good, but also it's like she's poisonous, so it's kind of like evil lingering around that she can't help because her father did this to her in one of his experiments. Okay, this story has a strong parallel with the Garden of Eden in the Old Testament. One of the first quotes that I have here says that it might once have been the pleasure place of an opulent family. And Giovanni is actually saying this quote. And basically, this is what he says when he first sees the garden. And it compares to the Garden of Eden because Adam and Eve were the richest on the earth, and an opulent family, that kind of ties together. Another quote is, "Some plants were placed in urns, rich with old carving, and others in common garden pots. Some crept serpent-like along the ground." And in both of the gardens and in the stories, it mentions the presence of a serpent or a snake. And we know that in the Garden of Eden, this is the creature that tempted Eve to commit the first sin. The next quote I have is, "Was this garden then the Eden of the present world? And this man, with such a perception of harm in what his own hands caused to grow, was he the Adam?" And that's honestly just like a direct comparison to the Garden of Eden. I mean, it mentions the Eden of the present world, and it also mentions Adam's name directly. The next quote I have from the story reads, "Evidently, her experience of life had been confined within the limits of that garden." And Beatrice Rappaccini is seen to be an Eve-like figure, only knowing what's in the garden and nothing else before eating the fruit. That's Eve. And, Beatrice Rappaccini, her father, would never let her out of the garden because she's poisonous. So basically, it's both stories were had evil lingering in the midst of beautiful flowers, and it looks good on the outside, but on the inside there's more to it. Both females in both stories are seen to be dangerous to the male figures. So that's kind of it's a very strong parallel if you read the story that these two gardens have in common. And this is just a picture of the Garden of Eden. If you can kind of think in your mind of the picture I showed previously. Here is the serpent that is mentioned. And over here, I actually just found this on the internet. It says references to the Old Testament of the Bible. Giovanni can be compared to Adam. Beatrice can be compared to Eve. And Rappaccini, the doctor, can be compared to God or, some kind of higher power. And Baglioni is kind of like the devil in disguise is what I see him as. Symbolism. Hawthorn is known for using a lot of symbolism. In this story, he uses a purple flower, just the flower and purple in general as symbols. The flower goes on to be seen as Beatrice's sister. One of the quotes that I got from it was, "Then with all the tenderness in her manner that was so strikingly expressed in her words, she busied herself with such attentions as the plant seemed to require, and Giovanni at his lofty window rubbed his eyes and almost doubted whether it were a girl tending to her favorite flower or one sister performing the duties of affection to another." So the first time we see the plant is when Dr. Rappaccini goes to the garden with masking gloves on and calls for Beatrice to tend to the plant. And she comes and she's not wearing any protection. So, and also Giovanni describes that Beatrice appears to be one of the flowers herself in skin tone and in the color of her dress. She hugs it and tends to it affectionately as if they were indeed sisters. And also in the story it mentions that Dr. Rappaccini planted the flower on the same day that his daughter Beatrice was born. So the plant itself is a symbol as though they are like sisters, if that makes any sense. So basically this story had an almost direct parallel with the Garden of Eden and some pretty strong symbols as well. And I hope you were able to understand all of my information. I'm not really good with talking, even if I'm not in front of people, but here's my works cited page, and attached I'll have a better summary of the story since I was a little chopped up in that. Thanks for listening.